Perfect. So hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this awesome chat and learn today. I am so excited to be joined by our very special guest, who I will introduce shortly. But just want to welcome you all and say thank you for being here in the midst of everything that is going on. We really, really appreciate your time today, even if it's just listening in. And so quickly before we get started, I did just want to cover some quick housekeeping things. We want you to participate as much as you feel comfortable doing. So if you feel comfortable turning on your camera or sharing your voice, please feel free to do so. We would love to see you. And if you don't feel comfortable, totally okay and understandable as well. You will show up on the live recording if you do come off of mute at any time during the conversation. I did just want to let you know for privacy purposes, this is being recorded, so you will get an email afterwards with the rewatch link. So don't worry about taking a bunch of notes right now. You can always come back. And then, feel free to chime in the chat, whether it's a question or a comment. We really want to hear from you and have you participate as much as possible. And then feel free to keep up with us on social. We are at Power to Fly on all social channels, and then you can subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. And so diving in today, I am so excited to introduce Lauren Washington. Lauren is the co-founder and CEO of Funder, a platform that automates and removes bias from seed funding by creating portfolios of AI-vetted startups. Prior to this, Lauren co-founded Black Women Talk Tech, the largest membership organization and only conference for Black women founders, and Keep Up, a social listening platform. Her companies have won multiple awards, including the world's largest pitch competition, 43 North, and the Advanced Imaging Society's Distinguished Leadership Award. She's been featured in the New York Times, Elle, Inc., and Black Enterprise, and has been listed as a top female entrepreneur in Essence Magazine, Entrepreneur Magazine, and CIO Magazine, among others. So Lauren, with that, I want to pass the mic right over to you, see if there's anything else you want to add in today's introduction.
I think that's a pretty good overview. What is not on there is that I was in the corporate space for about 10 years before I started my first company. So I worked at InStyle Magazine, TV Guide, Neutrogena, and then went on the agency side and did branding for over 100 global companies. And actually right outside of college, I started my career at Teach for America. So I was a special education teacher before I jumped on the corporate side. So kind of had a windy path to get to where I am, but I think it all kind of connects in the end.
I love that. And I know we're going to talk about a little bit of your background in corporate, but I think that's so important to bring up because so many times when we see accomplished individuals, we can feel like it's so out of reach because our backgrounds are, in something totally different than what we want to do or what we aspire to do. So thank you for touching on that. Mm-hmm. And then today, I just wanted to cover, these are going to be the principal themes for today's conversation. So some of the lessons that Lauren's learned along the way, helping you avoid some of the mistakes that she's made, and then tips for getting started with your own idea. So we're going to cover these through the pre-submitted questions that we have. But again, I did just want to let everyone know you can feel free to come off of mute. You can feel free to write your question in the chat or message me privately, and I can ask it anonymously. And so with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and dive right into this first question, Lauren, which is, when did you know it was time to leave your corporate career in the corporate world and go into a business for yourself? And what helped you decide to start a business versus pursuing a CEO job?
Yeah, I love that question because it was not an easy decision. I knew that I always wanted to start my own business. That was something that I had dreamed about since I was 9 years old. And so I was always going to be on that path. But after I went to business school and came out and started working, trying to figure out saving up the amount of money that I needed to save in order to be an entrepreneur. I think I would recommend making sure you have at least 18 months of living expenses saved up, which is not always easy, or at least have some other way to bring in money on the side, because the business can be volatile, especially in the early days, and you may not be getting paid. So I wanted to make sure I was doing that. I had loans that I was dealing with. And then also, I think a lot of it was just the confidence of feeling like I could start a company, because particularly when I started back in 2014, I didn't really see other women who looked like me, who were doing tech companies. Um, it's one of the reasons why I started Black Women Talk Tech, because I struggled to find people who were successful in what I wanted to do. And so taking that leap to do it was a little bit scary. But what ended up happening was the last job that I had, it was a pretty rough role for me, and it was a pretty toxic environment. People were quitting, like 5 people a week were quitting, and I was just ready to go and ready to leave. And I had actually gone to interview for another company in order to move on from my role, and I got that offer, and then I sat and thought, I was like, I can't work for someone else anymore. Like I literally just, after that bad experience, I just could not uh, see myself building for other people, because I always wanted to do it for myself. And so that was just sort of the turning point for me, to start moving into my first company. And I had already been working on Keep Up for a couple of months. Like I said, I had already been saving and planning for this move. And I just decided to take that leap. And what ended up happening was literally 3 months later, I won the 43 North competition up in Buffalo, which is the world's largest competition. We won $250,000. And for me, that was just a sign that I had made that right move to kind of jump into this world.
Well, thank you for sharing. And so this is so incredible. And also, I can't imagine all the feelings you must have felt when you first decided, okay, I'm going to go ahead and do this. Can you talk about that a little bit? And then can you kind of talk about the order of how things came about? I believe you started with Keep Up, and then you then founded Black Women Talk Tech.
Mhm. Yeah, I would say in terms of the feelings, it is terrifying. I am still terrified as an entrepreneur, because you're building something, you're taking this huge moonshot that you hope will work out, but 90% of businesses fail. And especially if you're doing something that nobody has done before, you don't have a blueprint, right? So you're creating something completely out of the blue. So it can be really scary, but I would say it's also exhilarating, and it's incredibly fulfilling, to be able to have an idea that you bring to fruition, that other people then use and love and share. I mean, there's no feeling like that, at least that I haven't had within my work previously. So I think those are definitely some of the feelings that you have to deal with. I think a lot of times people say, oh, you're so fearless, you kind of just jump into things. And it's not that I'm fearless, I'm terrified. It's just that you move past it, right? You're doing it despite the fear that comes with it. And I think that's what you need to have to understand when you're jumping into entrepreneurship, that everyone has that same fear and feeling, but you kind of just move past it and sort of keep pushing along. And then as far as the businesses, so after my first business was Keep Up. As I mentioned, we moved up to Buffalo for the 43 North competition. I was there for about a year. And during that time, I was going to all these different conferences. And every conference that I went to then, I did not see literally anybody who looked like me. I was literally the only Black woman in the room most of the time. And that could be, it was isolating. And it was not only isolating, but it was tough to hear a lot of the advice and a lot of the stories that people were sharing on these stages, because they did not reflect my experience, right? They were not how I was interacting with investors. They were not how I was moving my company forward. And then during that time, I met these two women at these conferences, and it was literally like you would see someone across the room and you're like, oh my goodness, like another woman. And you ran over. And that's how I met my co-founders for Black Women Talk Tech. And so we kind of started that, not really meant to be a business, not meant to be a conference. But when we launched the first one in 2017, we wanted to have about 30 people in the room. We had over 300 people who wanted to attend that session. So we were like, okay, obviously there's a need for this, and started building it up. And then so all of my experience with Keep Up and my experience with Black Women Talk Tech then led to Funder, because I had so many issues fundraising in my first company. And I heard so many women say that they had the same issues. They, no matter how great they were, no matter how big their businesses are, the goalposts were always moving for them. They couldn't get access to the right people. And for me, that just sparked an idea that we need to sort of change the system. And that's what we're trying to do with Funder.
I love this. And I love this story. And we had a question that came in from Joan that says, did you have some of the suggested 18 months saved prior to winning the 250K?
I did, yeah. So I would say for about a year before, I was actively saving because I knew I wanted to leave to start my business. I didn't know exactly when that was going to be, but I wanted to make sure that I was ready to do it, because I had already started working on this, and I wanted to make sure that I had some savings there. I did not have the full 18 months, I will say, and I wish I did, because it truly does take at least that amount of time before you are on any kind of real consistent path in terms of bringing in revenue. And you don't really want that to be the reason why you stop working on your company or your company fails, is because you financially don't have that net. It is a privilege, I would say, to be able to save that kind of money, and a privilege to be able to sort of work full time on your company. I recognize that it's tough to do, but understanding the financials, because I think that really surprised me, and for how long it lasted. It wasn't really just 18 months. It was really ups and downs for, I'd say, the first 4 or 5 years of me building these businesses. Just being ready for that financially and mentally is super important.
And I think you bring up such a good point. And so I want to ask you, when it comes to pricing, right? And when you're trying to build out your businesses, because we talk and we have a lot of conversations around building your own businesses and diving into entrepreneurships. And sometimes we don't get to talk about some of the more logistical factors around it. So when you were talking about pricing, when you were talking about, reaching out to people, what did those kinds of things look like? And how were you able to set aside, like a budget accordingly, and set aside, time to reach out to people? And I don't know if my question's making total sense, but all of these small little logistics that I guess you don't really think about prior to diving in, right? Because you're kind of
Mhm.
like, the idea is so big and there's so many things to do. So I guess making my question more succinct is, how did you budget the time to like reach out to people about your business? And then on the other hand, how did you budget out the overhead for what the business would need and how many people you would need to start that business?
Yeah, I think they're good questions, and a lot of it you just sort of figure out as you go along. So I think sometimes you see this your idea, right? You have this big vision, and a lot of people get overwhelmed by that, right? It's like, how do I create what I think is going to be the next Google? And the truth is that Google was not built in a day. None of these companies were. They've taken small baby steps to move towards these, and they're testing and they're failing and they're shifting and changing things. That's true for your outreach and customer sales. That's true, very true for pricing, because pricing is one of the hardest things you'll probably do. It's not an exact science. It's just sort of based on the value that the customer is willing to pay you for the services that you're providing. But I think in terms of trying to budget your time, what do you think is the most important thing that you need to do in order to get sort of to that next stage, right? It's probably not creating business cards. It's not the little fun things. It's really about talking to customers and getting their feedback, trying to build your prototype as quickly as possible so that you can go to market, because oftentimes those customer interviews don't really tell you anything until people have something in front of them. And then testing over and over and over again and continuing to reiterate. And then I think if you continue to do that, you'll look back and be surprised at where you are in a couple of months. The other thing I would say is it's really important to have a team. I will say, particularly for women of color, we tend to want to take the road alone, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But it is very difficult to do this by yourself. First of all, being a founder, an entrepreneur is just lonely on its own. So having some support around you is important, but then you can always go faster with a team, right? If you have co-founders, if you have people who are there who believe in you and are willing to put the time and effort in, you don't have to worry about how to split your time between everything, because you're designating things, and everyone has their piece that they can bring to the project. So I really think about that. But one thing I would say is making sure you have people who are bringing in complementary skills, people who are really dedicated to what you're doing, because again, this is a hard road. And so making sure that you really have people who are going to do the work and that you can see working with for at least the next decade, right? So I hope that answered your question. That's how I would approach it.
Yes, definitely, because we have a lot of conversations around entrepreneurship, and sometimes I think that we don't touch on these things that are so important as well, right?
Mhm.
Because of course, like the ideas of jumping into your own business, what does that mean? How do you emotionally prepare and all of that? That's definitely important. But knowing about the team, who you should work with, like how to pick somebody to work with.
Mhm.
So I appreciate that, and thank you, because I know the question was a little bit confusing. But I wanted to ask you, Lauren, next, do you have a favorite book that was your go-to during your journey? And I guess now on your journey, I'm sure it's
Mhm.
changed a little bit.
Yeah, I really love this question because I read a lot. I read probably between 40 and 60 books a year. So I like to continue to learn and grow. And I think particularly if you're in tech, you kind of have to, right? Everything is shifting and changing so quickly that it's almost your job to keep up with all of those things. But I will say when I first started, there were a couple of books that really stuck out to me. One was The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz. I think that was the first book about business that I read where he talked about how hard it was. And even though he was having all this great success, sometimes there were dips in that, right? Or he was on the cusp of IPOing and he thought his company might fall apart. And that's very real, right? And so understanding that it is truly an emotional roller coaster and to be ready for that ride and that success is not a straight path up really I think prepared me for my road ahead. I would say the other thing, if you're looking into fundraising, for me that was a blind spot. I didn't understand anything about fundraising when I started, but there were a couple of really good books. One is Venture Deals. I believe Brad Feld wrote that. And then the other one is Angel by Jason Kalanassis. Those are really great ways to sort of get in the mindset of these investors so that you can really present yourself well in those meetings. And then I also really want to point out women entrepreneurs. I feel like when you read a lot of these business books, they're mostly by men. A couple of books I read recently that I loved was It's About Damn Time by Arlen Hamilton. I thought that was incredible about her journey and becoming this big time VC. And then Killing It by the woman who started Rebel brand drinks. Blanking on her name, but she's really incredible and just really again talked about those highs and lows and the emotion of starting a company and seeing it through to exit. I thought was really great. So those are a couple that like really stick out to me.
I love this. And I want to follow up this question with, your favorite sort of personalities in the space that you follow. You mentioned Arlen Hamilton. I also
Mhm.
follow her on Twitter. I actually follow quite a few founders, and it's so interesting because a lot of times they talk about different things around venture capitalism and different types of funding and
Mhm.
all of this stuff, and it's really great insights. But do you have a favorite personality or personalities that you follow?
Oh gosh, I mean, there's so many people that I follow that are not only big personalities like Arlen or Julia Collins is incredible. She's the first Black woman to raise for $1 billion valuation company. But I would say a lot of people that I'm inspired by are my peers. It's just people who are starting their own companies. We're kind of all in the same space, building things out, and then just seeing over the years us growing together and then sticking with it and where they've been able to go for me is inspiring. So I think for I love, and that's why I mentioned a little bit about creating your community and making sure you have other people around you who are doing this because that's what's really going to keep you going. You can look at inspiration. I think that's really important, but having other people who are sort of in this fight with you and will bring you along and encourage you to move forward is huge. So those are the people who I think are my inspiration.
I love it. Thank you for sharing. And this leads me actually to the next question, which is, what role did networking play in your entrepreneurship journey, and how has that kind of evolved from the beginning to now?
Yeah. So I think in this world, networking is everything. Like you have to get out there and be willing to talk about your business all day, every day. You have to not only meet with customers, but if you're raising capital, that's a full-time job. You're meeting with VCs and investors constantly, building up partnerships. So being able to build your network up is really important. I will say the one thing, not the one thing, but one of the big things about going to business school was that I sort of had that built-in network, and I didn't realize how much I was able to lean on that, after I left. So I think finding ways that you can tap into larger communities is really important. I will say that I started Black Women Talk Tech because I didn't have a community that looked like me, right? And so we created that so that I could have other entrepreneurs and investors who were truly focused on what we were doing. So the Black Women Talk Tech community is great, but now I feel like there's a lot more startup communities that are very specific to who you are demographically or what you're doing in terms of industry, and finding those and tapping into it is really key, I think, to the long-term success, not only because of the business growth that you can get out of it, but because again, like that emotional support is so important. Being around people who are doing what you're doing is only going to sort of move you to that next phase.
Love that. And I want to ask you a question because you've founded and built these different companies. And so do you feel like it's easier now than it was? Because it almost feels like with the different availability of technology, with the world moving more remotely, it almost feels like in one aspect, it might be cheaper to start your own business and grow. But on the other hand, it does feel like there's a lot of saturation when it comes to events. People have a lot of Zoom fatigue. So it's also maybe a lot harder to get people on the phone because people just don't want to spend more time than they have to on the computer or on the phone. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about that.
Yeah, I think those are the exact two things. If you talk to investors, they will say it's easier than ever to start and run a business. If you ever speak to them, they say it's the cost is low and you can get out there. There's sites that build your apps for you. But because of that, that means there's a significant amount of competition now. So if you talk to entrepreneurs, they'll say it's actually much harder because there's more competition, and the goals that you need to reach to get those early dollars in have shifted pretty drastically, even from when I started my first business. Now I talk to people and investors, and in the earliest stages, they're looking for to make $10,000 a month in recurring revenue. That's a lot for your first dollars in. They expect you to be much further along, but again, the reality is that the landscape is also just much more competitive, and there's just so many more people out there that it's a little bit tougher. I will say, if this is what you want to do, you can get started easily, right? You can get started and build something really quickly, and that's exciting, and you can start bringing dollars in really quickly if that's what you want to do. But just being aware of kind of how the market is right now is important.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And it's so true, right? It's like, yeah, it's a benefit, but to every benefit, there's like the
Mhm.
opposite of a benefit, which I'm blanking on the word right now. So thank you.
Yeah.
And we had a question that came in from Lydia, which asked, do they have to be in your industry, or do you encourage networking outside of your industry as well?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think networking outside of your industry is helpful. Any kind of entrepreneur that's in your space is probably going to be helpful in some way. But I think within the industry, because if you're looking to do tech, it's just so specialized, right? That the more people that you know within it, the more you can sort of build your reputation, the more you can understand the industry itself, the better, right? But I have been surprised that people who sort of just came back into my life later on. One would be my co-founder of Funder. I met him about 12 years ago in a fellowship program that we both did. I went my path down marketing. He went his path down investment. And then literally 12 years later, now we're working on the same company together because our paths sort of came back and I had no idea we'd be doing this and neither did he, right? So obviously keeping that open, you never know who's going to come back into your life and, create these kind of business partnerships.
I love a good story like that, where it's like things just work out perfectly and you get I think that's such a beautiful story about networking and speaks to the importance of networking and building those connections. So thank you. And we had another question that was pre-submitted, and I also want to encourage people on the line to please ask your questions. Would love to hear, what you have to say or anything that you would love to know from Lauren. So somebody wrote in, I have so many ideas on businesses. How do I know which one to move forward with and which would be the most beneficial for my time? How do you know if an idea is going to fail?
So there's no way to know if it's going to fail. You just have to kind of jump in there and test it. But I will say that's probably one of the key traits of an entrepreneur is that you have a million ideas running through your head. I mean, I see a business opportunity almost every single day. I'm like, that would make a great business. That would make a great business. We are prone to chasing shiny things for sure. So I think it's hard to sort of parse out what is right for you. But I think there are a couple of things to think about. One is, do you have the background and the skill set to do whatever you're doing? Not only because it's a tough road, even if you do, but that's something that a lot of people will ask you, right? Like if you are in the consumer world and then jump into biotech, how are you going to be successful in that, right? So thinking about that, what is your skill set? What is your background? The second is, I mentioned before, you are talking about your business literally all day, every day. So what is the one thing that your friends and family are sick of hearing about from you, right? Like, what are you just constantly bringing up in conversation that keeps you up at night, that makes you feel like burning desire that you need to sort of address this issue and tackle it? That's the important thing to think about. When I first started my first company, I started it in a practical way because that's what I knew and that's what I did. And I saw this opportunity and I got some funding, but it didn't keep me up at night, right? And you need that kind of passion to keep going through and keep pushing. So I think that's a real key thing. One thing, the way I like to sort of talk about that is, if this idea did not exist in the world, do you feel like the world would be a worse off place? Ask yourself that question about everything you're doing. And I think that'll hopefully give you a little bit more clarity about what to pursue.
I love that advice, especially the advice of, what people are sick and tired of hearing you talk about. And I want to ask you a question here as well. For somebody who might be working full time and trying to build a business on the side, how do you know when it's time to jump right into that? Or if you do have an idea, how do you know it's time to leave? I mean, I know that you mentioned before the 18 months worth of savings, but what if you feel like you're at this point that you're at the breaking point, or not breaking
Mhm.
point, but like, the breakthrough point?
I think it's a personal question. I think everyone has to decide that for themselves because again, your financial situation, your home life, whether you're ready emotionally to do it, there's a lot of different factors that come in. The one thing I will say is that if you have all those things in place and you feel like you're getting sales in, right, you're getting consistent sales and it's starting to grow, you are going to move so much faster if you're working on that 100%. I tend to see people who are afraid to let go of their safe job in order to really focus on something that could really blow up and be something big. And you're not going to be able to make that same progress working part-time or working weekends on something that you would if you really gave it your all. And so I think if you're seeing that money come in, you tested it, you know that it's going to work, you have other people who are ready to jump on board with you. Think about the fact that it's going to scale and it's going to grow so much faster if you're putting your 100% time, energy, and resources into it versus kind of doing it on the side.
Oof, what a scary move to make, right? You're
Mhm.
like,
It is.
oh, oof. That is a scary move to make, but I appreciate you sharing that. And so, I want to ask you as well. You had talked a little bit before about reaching out to investors for fundraising, and that a lot of investors won't talk to you unless you maybe have $10,000 a month revenue that you're bringing in. When did you know with your businesses that it was time to bring in investors beyond winning the competition that you won?
Yeah, and I love this question because I did this differently for each of my businesses. And I can tell you why as I go through. So, the first business that I had, I mentioned we had won that competition. So, very early on, we had brought in funding. And I don't think it was the right time for us to do that. I think a lot of times people see funding as like a success point for them. But truly, your funding that comes in should be accelerating a business that you already know is working, because if not, then you're really just burning through cash. And I don't regret taking that money, but I regret that we weren't far enough along to utilize it in the way that we could have, right? To sort of propel our business versus trying to figure out what the business model was and how we're going to make this work. So that's how I did the first time, is that I raised right away. And then the second time, with Black Women Talk Tech, we didn't raise at all. And so I think the three of us had our own tech companies and just made the conscious decision that we could make money without raising money, and we can scale this off of the revenue and profits that we had without bringing in outside investors. And what was exciting about that was the freedom. We could do whatever we wanted. We could grow however fast we wanted or however slow we wanted. We could make the decisions we felt like were right for us. Um, and and that was really important for the type of business that we were building. We did not necessarily want other people to sort of dilute the authenticity of what we were creating. So that was a very important decision that we made there. And then for Funder, we are actually now going out to raise after 2 years of bootstrapping. And the reason why I did that was because of my experience with the other companies, right? Being able to make sure that your business model works, make sure that people want to use this, because when you go out with data and proof that your business works, your fundraising experience is going to be so much easier and so much faster, right? It's an uphill battle when you're trying to convince people that of your big idea, but when you have proof of that big idea that other people believe in it as well, it shifts the power in that conversation. And so we purposefully waited and held off to go out and raise institutional money until we were at the point where we felt like we have enough data to prove that this is a business, and the money that we're going to bring in is really going to scale that business for us, right? We're going to put it to use in a way so that we can grow incredibly quickly.
I feel like listening to you, I'm getting a behind the scenes of like Shark Tank and an explanation of everything they say, like why they say it and the questions
Mhm.
that they ask. I absolutely love that show, and I've learned so many awesome things in there. Not only
Yeah.
applying it to maybe becoming an entrepreneur, to businesses, but also to who you are like as a person, right? And your professional growth, and like when you want to go negotiate a new salary or a higher
Mhm.
salary, right? I feel like a lot of what it comes down to is having the receipts and being able to back
Yeah.
up what you say. And so with these three very different experiences, what is something you wish you had known when you started your entrepreneurial journey?
Oh gosh. I wish I knew. I would say the one thing I wish I knew was around the people, and making sure that the people who are around you are the right ones. Um, Not necessarily to hire people because they're your friends, and they're excited and you're all excited about the idea of starting a business. And to make sure that the people who are coming in are doing it for the right reasons, because they believe in your vision, because they want to be at a startup, because they are bringing complementary skills into the business. Because truly, the only thing you have in the early stages of a startup are your team, and they could make or break you. And so I wish I really understood how important that team was, and even being willing to wait to find the right people. Um, versus just kind of grabbing anybody because you kind of want that support and you want to keep going and moving. So I would say that's the biggest thing. It's something that a lot of people ask around co-founders. I'm a big supporter of co-founders, but they have to be the right people, because it is a tough journey, like I mentioned, and the co-founder relationship is tough as well. And so you need to have people who are truly in it with you, in order to kind of build and grow.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And I see that we have a question from Veronica, but we had a couple pre-submitted questions that I wanted to follow up with by putting them all into one. So you're talking about the importance of a team and knowing that when you go into this, we've talked about funding, we've talked about how much money you ideally should have. So when it comes down to it, how big and how much money do you think you need to start a business, right? Like, what if you have no capital? And how many different team players do you need? And I'll give more context here. Do you think it's necessary to have a lawyer, an accountant, start with a few employees, or do you think it's better to just kind of launch with a very, for lack of a better term, a bootstrap team and bootstrap finances?
Yeah, I think it really depends on the type of company that you're starting, right? So I would say for biotech, I wouldn't just wing it. For what we're doing with Funder, we needed to bring legal in early on because there's just a lot of rules around the SEC, with money management that we needed to sort of be aware of. But the one thing I will say in any business in the early days is be as scrappy as you can possibly be, right? You don't necessarily need a lawyer. You can go to LegalZoom. I have done all of my incorporation documents either on LegalZoom or Rocket Lawyer or things like that. Done all my contracts that way. When we brought in lawyers, we negotiated pretty hard with them in terms of creating packages versus paying by the hour. You can kind of do things like that. That with accountants, there's QuickBooks, there's Wave. In the early days, you're not even really bringing money in like that, so you don't need an accountant for that. So I think there's ways to sort of get around and be scrappy and not really pay that much for what you're doing. And I would definitely recommend doing that for as long as you can, truly. I think as a business, if you can cut your costs, the more you can do that, the higher profit is going to be. So if you're in that mindset already from the beginning that you're not going to just burn through cash, that's going to serve you long term. But I will say for Funder, I mean, we probably spent like a couple $100s a month for the first couple of years, on the business, just keeping the lights on, and everything else we negotiated or we found free services or we bartered with people, to help us. And, I think that's the sign of a good entrepreneur, if you can sort of be sort of scrappy and resourceful to sort of bring your vision to life.
I love this. Thank you I love all of these like tangible tips that you're providing. So I want to thank you for that. And now talking about yourself, what Veronica asks here, what behaviors do you engage in to make you successful and resilient? Do you do exercise, meditation, etc.? What's your morning and night routine?
hmm I think this is such an important question. I will say that for me, it took me a long time to figure out how to set boundaries between myself and my work. I think when you're an entrepreneur and you love what you do, you want to work on this all day, every day. There's always something you could be doing. And it's hard to sort of get out of that mindset that you need to really stop and take a break, because I hit burnout many, many times until I learned that I have to sort of build it into my regular routine of exercising on a regular basis. I do yoga that sort of combines exercise and meditation all in one. Making sure that you're connecting with people. You make time for your friends and your family and your community. And then for me, what I do is actually I set certain hours that I work. And obviously sometimes it'll go over, but I usually stop working around 6 p.m. I do a real 9 to 6 now. And if there's something important, I'll stay and I'll do it. But I don't let myself work 120-hour weeks like I used to, unless there's something, major coming up. I make sure I take at least a day off on the weekends, and forcing myself to do this, because otherwise I'm not going to have the resiliency and energy that I need to keep going. I think that that burnout is real, and that off time is just as important as the time that you're actually working.
Thank you so much for, telling us that and being vulnerable in that. And I would love to ask you, when you hit burnout as a founder, how did you deal with that? Because, if you're an employee, it's way easier to say, okay, I need to step away and I need to like take a break. But when it's your own company,
Yeah.
if you're not moving, it's difficult to make the company move. So how did you handle that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to give yourself the grace to take time off as well. Like you can take some time off. If you take the next day off, I always think about this. If I don't work tomorrow, is the world going to stop? And the answer is no, right? Because what I'm doing is important, yes, but it is not holding the world up. And even if I don't get that email out, the world will keep moving and it'll shift and change, and you'll find a way back to what you're doing, right? So I think being able to really make space for yourself, and also as a leader, set the standard that it's okay to take time off to your employees as well, is really important, right? If they don't see you taking time off, they're not going to take time off either. And so I think it's being able to sort of build that into your schedule and your time. I think we're moving away from this idea that founders have to like kill themselves for 10 years in order to get to the place that they want to be. That off time is just as important as as your on time.
I love it. And it is such an important point, especially in this day and age with all of this craziness going on. We really need to make sure that we're setting the bar for ourselves and those around us so that they know
Mhm.
taking a break is okay and it is necessary to be able
Yeah.
to, continue to innovate and be creative. So thank you. And so I wanted to ask you, how do you know when to implement your ideas as opposed to continuing to plan? And at what point do you test out your idea in the real world?
Mhm.
And do you have to have a finished product or a website?
Yeah, I think you should test in the real world as soon as you can. Get something that they call the MVP, minimum viable product. Even if you don't build something like that, because that generally speaks to the actual product itself. Like you said, you can create a web page and see how many signups you get from that. How can you create something that is a good enough version of what you're trying to do to go out there and test it. And I will say that's actually the best way to see if you have a good idea, because if people are going to pay you for something that is just really crappy and terrible, you're onto something. And I think we've all done that, where we've gone to like these really shady websites and you're like, I really just need this and I'm going to pay them for it. It looks terrible, but I'm going to do it because I need this so badly. um, think about something like that, right, in terms of your business. And that was true for, I would say, Black Women Talk Tech. Our first event that we did, it was just in a room at Google. We kind of like, we didn't throw it together. We were working really hard on it, but didn't have all the bells and whistles that our conferences came to have. But we had so many people who were willing to just put down money for that, and that it sort of keyed into the idea that we have something that people find valuable, right? So I think the earlier you can do that and start testing it and seeing and getting that feedback, the better. With Thunder, we had been doing a lot of testing over, I'd say, the last year or so, but we just launched officially in November. And the feedback we got from actually really being in the marketplace versus, again, talking to people and getting feedback on something that didn't exist was just invaluable, right? So I think the earlier the better for testing and jumping in the real world.
Perfect. And I wanted to let you know that people really loved what you said about taking a break and,
Oh, good.
combating burnout, that people felt that was
Mhm.
very refreshing to hear that. So I wanted to let you know that. Um, and that leads me to the second question. So in that sort of idea, is it worth it to charge people from the beginning, or is it better to offer things at a discounted price or for free so you can get that feedback?
Yeah, that's a great question. And like I mentioned earlier, pricing is so difficult to do. So it depends on a lot of different factors. If you can charge for something upfront and you know people are willing to pay you for it, and this tends to happen more so with services. So for example, our conference, we could pay upfront because people understood what conferences were. They understood the value generally that they get out of it. We weren't selling something completely new that we had to sort of teach them on or educate them on. So that was something where we could charge upfront, and we had costs to cover that we knew we couldn't make this happen if we didn't. When it comes to something like technology, it's a little different, right? Because something with Funder, it's brand new. We have to educate people. They don't really understand it till they use it. And in something like that instance, it might be helpful to actually not charge in some of your pilots, right? So you can get the feedback, you can get excitement from people. They can really understand it a little bit, but charge as soon as you can. And you're never really going to understand pricing until you put something out there for people to then pay for, right? You can do competitive analysis. I think that's important, going around, seeing what your competitors are doing, what do their business models look like, how are they charging things, to sort of understand where it might live. But you're really not going to get that feedback until you actually put something out in the public. One thing I would say that you can do is you can always raise your prices, right? So I would err on the side of being conservative in the early days, because again, you're building your trust and you're building your credibility. People don't necessarily know you. And they're used to prices going up. We all get mad about when Netflix raises their prices, but we're still going to pay it, right? We understand that prices tend to go up. So I would start low, on the low side, so that you can build that audience. And then once you've proven your value out to them, you can always raise it later.
Fantastic advice. And I feel like you have just provided so many insights, so much great information here. And I want to lead us in the next question, which is, what if you want to become a founder, but you don't have an idea? What is your advice for somebody who's sick of working for somebody, but doesn't know what to do?
I would say go find co-founders, go find other people who have started something that you believe in and you love. I mean, there's a whole community on Angel List, and there's a lot of these like co-founder dating sites. And if you go to conferences, you can find people. I mean, we've had a number of stories of people who came to the Black Women Talk Tech conference and found their co-founders there, right? So if you don't feel like there's something that you're ready to build, or if you're one of those people who likes to come in a little bit later, right? You're not maybe the early starter, but you want to kind of build on something that's already begun, you can definitely find people who are looking for co-founders. It's a big thing, particularly for women. I think it's a little bit harder for us to find people to join our ideas. And so definitely go out there, start talking to people. If you're excited about what someone's doing, ask to join their team. I've had so many people who've come and joined me and all of my startups who just literally reached out to me on LinkedIn and said, I love what you're doing. Can I help in some way? And most founders will be pretty open to that, because we all need help.
Especially if you're using the barter system, right? Where you don't
Yes.
necessarily, where they can offer you something and you can offer them something.
Hmm.
I love it. So Lauren, tell us about Funder. Tell us about, I want to learn a little bit more about this, and where you're headed with Funder next, and how this is going to change investing. I'd love
Yeah.
to learn more.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what we're doing is trying to remove bias from investing and make it more efficient, as well as trying to maximize ROI. So, the way that really works is startups come in, they take an evaluation on 90 different pieces of data, but it's all quantitative. So, we're really nailing down each data point that you would normally look for in early stage investing, like your team and your traction and marketplace, but we're quantifying it. And that allows us to turn it into a score, and then tells us how much you should raise on our site. And then from there, we can take those companies who are vetted through that early stage algorithm, put them into portfolios, sort of like an ETF or 401k, for investors to then come and diversify their money into. And then we take care of the standardized term sheets, We do auto signing and auto population of those term sheets. We transfer the funds automatically through Plaid. And then we do automated monthly reporting and tracking. So something that could take for the average person at least 6 months to raise around. And it's even longer for underrepresented founders. And on the investor side, it takes about 3 to 5 years to build up their business. Our goal is to turn that into a single day, right? So that you can kind of go through with a click of a button, raise the money you need to, and get back to your business versus what I think is still a very antiquated industry, an antiquated way of doing business. And I always joke because, VCs are always trying to disrupt all these other industries and they have not disrupted themselves at all, right? And so that's what we're trying to do. That's the goal, is to help people who have great ideas get access to funding. And it doesn't matter who you are and what you look like and who you know, but just really truly the merit of your idea and what you've built, and allow people to invest in this asset class, because even on the investor side, it's very difficult to get in here, so that they can sort of build wealth within the startup community as well.
This is so incredible, and it makes it feel so much easier for somebody who has no idea what they're doing to be able to be connected to these funds and really bring their ideas
Right.
to life,
Mhm.
because you made a point before that 90% of businesses fail. So I want to go back to that, and I want to ask you, what sets apart that 10% that are successful?
Oh gosh. I would say there's a couple of different factors, but I would say a lot of it is luck. A lot of it is timing. A lot of it is who you know. And we're trying to even out that luck, right? Because one of the theories that we have is if everyone got an equal amount of funding, right, based on what they're bringing to the table, based on their tracking a true meritocracy, in terms of funding, who is actually going to succeed and could there be more companies that succeed. And I think oftentimes what happens is, usually companies fail because they run out of money. They run out of money, again, like I said, for themselves as co-founders, or they didn't they didn't raise enough money. I've seen that happen so many times. And so we're trying to sort of even that playing field and saying, if you all had money, who is actually going to really sort of rise to the top. And my thought is that, I think most people would be able to, right? And I think the playing field would be a lot more even than it is right now. But it's a tough thing to figure out. I would say, again, a lot of it is around luck, but the other piece is, are you seeing that consistent growth? Are you seeing, people coming to you, like I said, willing to pay you, willing to reach out to you for something that may not be perfect in your mind, but to them feels like it solves a true need or something that they truly love.
I love this. I love this. And what a great way to end. And so, Lauren, I want to ask you, how can we follow you? How can we support you? What can we do to keep up with you and everything you're doing? And if you have, just a last piece of advice for somebody on the line who's aspiring to be an entrepreneur or is in the real thick of it, what would you say to them?
I would say just do it. Just jump into it. Like you don't have to quit your job, and make a declarative statement on social media that I'm now. You can do this very slowly and sort of build, over time, part time. I think, don't be afraid to sort of take those first steps. It's scary, but those little steps, those little baby steps are going to build to what you're truly dreaming of. So just jump in, take that first step, whatever it is, to start moving towards your goal. And then I'd say in terms of finding me, you can find me on LinkedIn. I usually respond. It may take me some time, but I usually respond to all the messages if you send me one. And then you can find us on Funder, fundr.ai. If you're an investor, you can sign up. We have companies for you to invest in now. If you're a founder looking for investment, you can sign up. We have a rolling application, but we'll likely not start bringing on new funding investment opportunities until the summer for our founders.
I love this. Thank you so much. Joan, this has
Thank
been very
you.
informative, and I agree. I really feel like you provided so much tangible information and so many next steps. There's a lot of information to digest. So I know I'm definitely going to have to go back and watch a little bit more, rewatch and take some notes. But I want to thank you so much for your time today, Lauren. This has been absolutely fantastic. And I really, really appreciate you making time to chat with us.
This was so great. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Yes, yes, thank you. And thank you to everyone for being here today. I am wishing you a very non-2020 day. I know that we're in 2021, but still looking back on last year because it still feels like the same year. So thank you all, and I hope that you have an amazing day. Thank you. Bye.